Hey everyone, it's Sun Types, and today I'm talking about Surging Sparks and talking about the best cards, and I guess really all the cards from the set in this tier list. I already made the tier list. There are like a lot of cards here. I don't remember how many, like 100 and something. And these are the final evolutions, and I think there are a few Pokemon that aren't final evolutions. Like, for example, there's the Magneton. I don't remember if there's any other ones, but I broke them into tiers here, and I'm going to talk about the different tiers. This is definitely not like a super high, heavy loaded set at the top, but there's a lot of cards that are pretty solid. We have a decent chunk of cards in the A tier and B tier. We got, I mean, it's a pretty big set. Like Surging, or what was the last set? We had Stellar Crown, and this wasn't that big of a set. It was a pretty small set for a main set, or at least relatively small. And then we had, a mini set, and so this will be a bigger set, and it's not a set that's filled with a bunch of random cards either. Sometimes we see big sets. Well, there are some like kind of weird cards that are kind of just like filler, but not too many filler cards. There's honestly a lot of filler in Stellar Crown too, because of I don't know. Stellar Crown was like normally Japanese sets are well, there's like Japanese sets, and then an international set like Stellar Crown or Searching Sparks is made up of two Japanese sets, but Stellar Crown wasn't. Stellar Crown was like a Japanese set called Stellar Miracle plus a bunch of other cards. I don't remember where these cards came from, but they're not very good. A lot of these cards are just kind of whatever. But then on the other hand, Surging Sparks is made up of a few different sets. It's made up of Super Charged Breaker, a Super Electric Breaker, which is like the main set making up Surging Sparks. But then Paradise Dragana is also making up Surging Sparks, and these two sets are out in Japan. They've been out for a little while now, so there are results from the Japanese tournaments, for example. If you want to take a look at a deck playing Tera EX, you can find it here. And then also from these two decks, the Sylveon EX and Ceruledge EX decks, where they have the EXs as well as a few extra cards. So we have a lot of stellar EXs, and I will talk about those a little bit. But in the bottom tier here, I have 6 tiers. No, I have 7. Well, okay, I have 7 tiers, and then they're broken down. The like good tiers S through C. But F tier, we got a bunch of cards. I will talk about Chill, whatever this card, Chill Teaser. What is it? It's the item that like doesn't really do a thing. Yeah, Chill Teaser Toy. This is from the Justin Basil website I'm looking at here. And so this says you can only use it turn 1 going second. And then you can remove an energy from your opponent's Pokemon. And it goes back to their hand. It doesn't even get discarded or like lost under anything. It just goes back to their hand. How good is this on turn 1 going second? It's not very good, right? This card is kind of bad. It is a card that I do expect to see some level of play, though, because there is the Meowstic, which will be discarding it to use its ability to Gust, which I think is a pretty solid card, a little bit underrated. I don't think it's a broken card, but I think it's a pretty solid card. And in this tier, there are some cards that are kind of fun. You have Tatsugiri EX, you have this Grafaiai, which is like they're kind of meme cards, and there's not really much to talk about in this tier. It's pretty nothing, but maybe also these tiers are more so they're a bit looser. They are more meaningful as we get to the top, and they are not ranked in the tiers either. But then in the E tier, we have some trainers. These are the lowest I have any trainers on this tier list, and they're pretty bad. These trainers are pretty bad, and then the Pokemon are also pretty bad. You can't really think of use cases for like or particularly good use cases for any of them. We got some mediocre fire Pokemon that are very mediocre. We have some slightly better ones in this tier. And, maybe Magnezone will see play into Magneton decks, but probably not. I actually think this Castform is usable as a pivot within Fire decks, but ultimately it's kind of a nothing card. This Boufflant, you could pair with the other Boufflant, but again, kind of nothing. But then we're going to move up to the D tier, where there are some kind of interesting cards. And by the way, I have talked about all these cards multiple times, I think, for pretty much all the cards. And so I'm not going to talk much in detail about these cards, but when you have the Ace-Max what enriching energy is pretty bad. It's kind of useless, to be honest. It has like minor value, but also it's if it was a regular card, it would be pretty solid, but it's not. It's an Ace-Max. The 3 Ace-Max in this tier, we do have the one that's like double Versus Seeker. That card is called what is it called? Miracle Headset. Then we also have Megaton Blower in this tier for me, and then we also have what's it, the amulet card, Amulet of Hope, which like is a tool it's kind of like Radiant Jirachi essentially, but the Miracle, what's it, Miracle headset or whatever, that card has not really seen that much play in Japan. It's seen just a little bit, and it's ultimately not a super strong card, specifically within standard. I'll probably make a video actually talking about expanded at some point relatively soon. There's some pretty interesting things to say about expanded, and people aren't really thinking about it at all because, I mean, let's be honest, like who's playing expanded, right? So this would be a much better card in expanded, or I think Versus Seeker is a really good card in expanded, and Versus Seeker would be really good in standard. Ultimately, though, as an ace spec, it doesn't really do what it needs to do. But then in this tier, we also have, there's this item, I don't remember the name of this item, to be honest. It is deduction kit, and it says you get to look at the top 3 cards of your deck and either rearrange them or put them on the bottom. And so this could be useful for specifically Teal'c Ogre Pontiacs. I know it's seen play in that deck. The rest of this tier, most of these cards are kind of whatever. There are things to say about these cards if we really want to talk about these cards, but nothing super interesting or stuff that's like super complicated to the point where it's very difficult to really synthesize and like do anything with. There is, Stop Coco might be like kind of playable. I don't really know too much about it. I don't think it's really seen play, has it? No, it's not, but it's like a borderline playable card within Lightning Box decks. There are the Stellar EXs, the first of those, and there's 4 of them here: Cyclizar EX, Palossand EX, Flygon EX, and Sylveon EX. Sylveon EX is kind of weird, and these are evaluated in current standard, or standard once they come out, immediately when they come out, so with some consideration into the future. But Sylveon EX obviously is kind of on its own right now. Also, I didn't include the Eevee in this tier list. It's only Final Evolutions outside that Magneton, and so this Sylveon EX isn't particularly good. It has some use cases. D tier cards aren't like necessarily completely unplayable. Like there might be some playable ones in here, but ultimately they're generally pretty bad. And Sylveon EX has a lot of awkward elements to it, and ultimately has low upside. It is unsurprisingly better within the EVEX or the Evolution EX like box deck, the Evolution deck, and those cards aren't out yet. They will be coming in the mini set coming out at, I believe, the beginning of next year. I don't know exactly when it's coming, but it's coming. It's the next set before the first set of next year, and those will also be playable before rotation. Sylveon EX will be yet again in that set, and we'll see. We'll get a better evaluation of it at that point, and it can be more truly compared with the other Evolution EX. I've talked about them some, but there's some interesting stuff there that we'll get into later. But Palossand EX is kind of, I think it's pretty bad. Flygon EX is theoretically good, but also it is not good. There's some stuff to be said about it. Like it just isn't. It doesn't really work against like the decks that it's supposed to work against, and it has limitations. And Cyclizar EX is like really bad, but it is also I mean, they're all Teras, but it's a basic Tera Pokemon. It's colorless. You could put it in any deck, and it has 1 retreat, so it's not a bad card if you're trying to get simple value out of the like some Pokemon like Noctowl or Aerosio or Underdepths or Glass Trumpet or whatever. It could be playable within those decks and might be the best option, not because it's particularly good, but it's like kind of usable for a lot of decks. It's better than Trap Ghost because of retreat cost. I'm pretty sure it's 1 retreat cost. Trap Ghost EX would be that's 2 retreat cost, right? Yeah, it's 2 retreat cost. It does have less retreat. Trap Ghost EX has more HP, and there's lots of different ones. We'll talk about actually the Pikachu EX, which is arguably kind of similar to Cyclizar EX, except people actually are playing it. So that's something to consider. But there's some fun ones here, like the Durant EX card is a pretty fun card, but not particularly good. And you just have some kind of silly cards here. Then moving into C tier, I'd say C tier is where the cards start to get seriously like solid and playable. And I've broken it into 3 tiers, or 3 different like subsections. It's not like this top tier is better than this bottom tier. They're just broken up. So you have the support cards, and they have this for B tiers only support cards. I guess this is kind of attack. Oh, the Mesprit can be played with the Uxie and the Azelf, and I think that is like a playable deck. I haven't really heard anyone at all talk about the Mesprit. I think it's like an okay card. I don't think it's a great card, but it is a card which is kind of interesting. Has the Uxie seen play? I actually don't know if it has. I know the Azelf has. The Uxie has seen a little bit of play within Spreadbox, which I think is a honestly legit deck. It's playing the Mimikyu instead of the Azelf. Okay, I have no idea why that's happening. Maybe for the confusion attack, I suppose. But anyways, this is just a random list. So you have the Chien-Pao. This Chien-Pao is ultimately like not very good right now and might never be good in the metagame, but what it does is on play you discard a stadium from play. On play from hand, you discard a stadium from play, which is theoretically nice if there weren't like if people weren't playing lots of stadiums, so you could I think a lot of decks play some stadiums that have moderate to low value. You see Artizone, it's not like bumping that's a massive deal. You do see the most impactful one being Pokestop is like a nice stadium to play or to bump or whatever, but it's not the end of the world. But then if it stays in play or if it doesn't, it can cause issues, but it's like not insane. It's not like you're gonna lose if your opponent has Pokestop just on the spot. And then you also have Area Zero Underdamps, which is also a very powerful stadium, but ultimately you can just bump them, or you don't like they're not as bad as something like Path to the Peak, which we saw a few years ago, and that card was really, really difficult to. Actually, I guess it rotated less than a year ago, but anyways, that card was really, really difficult to play around, and we saw Pumpkaboo, which is very similar to Chien-Pao, be played, and so theoretically Chien-Pao could be played. We also see Smoochum for its energy acceleration attack. This is a card that is okay. It's a baby Pokemon. There are issues with baby Pokemon. There are positives to baby Pokemon. It's a pretty mediocre Pokemon, I believe. So it's 2 Psychic Energies. I think it is to the same Pokemon. And also it's like kind of like Technical Machine Evolution, which you could just play that card, right? Like it's a pretty, or not technical machine turbo energized. There we go. So you could play that card and kind of replace the Smoochum, but ultimately I think the Smoochum is an okay card and could be played in something, though not exactly sure what that is. We see a bunch of trainers. These trainers are very mediocre. There is Helper Bell, I believe is what the card is called, allowing you, it's kind of like Chill Teaser Toys, playable on the same turn only, but turn when going second, you can search for a supporter, and this is very useful for Pokestop, Professor Saw's Vitality decks like Reasonable Ogerpon, which is currently a top 5 deck in the metagame. And so I think it is a card that you definitely can play. Lisa's Appeal is a really hard one to evaluate. Ultimately, it's like a pretty mediocre to underwhelming card. What it says is you gust up on your opponent's benched basic Pokemon, and then it confuses it. Confusion isn't that good, but it's not that bad. If you're up against an all-basic deck, then it's directly better than Boss's Orders, but if you're not, then it's almost assuredly worse, unless you're getting particularly good value out of Confusion, which you could with Control decks. Ultimately, it's like a solid card for Control, and could be played in other things as well. Theoretically, if Boss Orders rotated, it would be really good, but that's probably not happening. Ultimately, it's essentially directly outclassed by Boss's Orders, but Boss's Orders is really good, and it's only a little bit worse than Boss's Orders, so theoretically you could say it's like an S tier card, but in terms of actual play it's going to get, it's not that good. Then we have a bunch of attackers. We see there's just a big mess of Pokemon. Admittedly, these 2 fighting Pokemon are pretty underwhelming, but I think there is something there. The Goldengo is also pretty mediocre to underwhelming. The Azumarill, I think, is a really, really underrated card. It says if you have a Tera Pokemon in play, its attack that it uses, not a technical machine, but the one it has on it can do it, which is 230 and 50 to yourself, but self damage isn't that big of a deal. But unless you're knocking yourself out, which you're not. But 230 for just 1 Psychic if you have a Tera Pokemon in play. Obviously, getting a Tera Pokemon in play isn't that hard. It's not free, but it's not that hard. A 230 for 1 on a stage 1 is pretty insane. And this is very efficient. I mean, it's really good, right? Palafin EX is kind of similar in terms of its damage output, and that card has some massive downsides. This does not have massive downsides, except it's a single prize stage 1, but it's a pretty underrated attacker from the set, in my opinion. We have this Miraidon, which is like a worse Mimikyu, but Mimikyu is a pretty good card. We have this weird Wuchien. We have the Azelf, which is kind of like, it's like a damage ramp attacker based on damage. I guess I don't know exactly how to describe it. It's 10 plus 10 more for each damage count on your opponent's Pokemon. It's solid in Dragapult Zadu, and you can play it with the Uxie as well. I think it's a pretty cool card. And then we have 4 EX in this tier as well. Scoovillin EX. Maybe this one's rated a little high. I think it's a card with potential, but it's mostly working off of potential, and also a lot of the cards that help it are rotating, but it is a kind of cool card that has theoretically a really high ceiling. Then we have the Slacking EX, which is a solid stage 2, has some like weird flaws, but probably won't come up too much in games. It can't attack if there are EX or Vs in play from your opponent, but they'll probably have this in play. And then Hydreigon EX. Ultimately, I don't think Hydreigon EX is that good, but I've heard a lot of other people say it's good, so definitely something you want to keep on your radar. It's a solid stage 2, kind of like Slacking EX, but also with theoretically this insane attack potential through the use of its stellar attack, which you could power up. Um, I don't know how you power it up, to be honest. Like, there are some ways to get some extra energies on, but to get 3 extra energies in addition to your attachment was pretty hard, but there are ways to do it. And then we also see the Executor EX, or Alolan Executor EX. Ultimately, I don't think Alolan Executor EX is a super, super strong card. However, it is, it's certainly very playable within Draco V-Star. I think it's pretty good, to be honest, in that deck. However, Dragonite, which is very similar, almost objectively better. I don't know if it's objectively better, but it probably is better. Has been seeing like no or very little play within Regidrago V-Star. This is not the Red Dragonite. It's seen some play, but not a ton. Then Alolan Executor EX has seen a little bit more, noticeably more in Japan, but ultimately how much better is it? I'm not sure. Then we see the control cards. These are these aren't supposed to be control. These are support trainers. So I still talk about these A specs. Energy Search Pro is really good within Gholdengo EX, allowing you to do a massive burst attack. And then what are these? I keep forgetting the names. Is it Secret Mixer? Brilliant Blender. I was close. Brilliant Blender. It discards 5 cards from your deck. This is good. Kind of very similar ways to Energy Search Pro, allowing for big burst attacks. It's seen, I think, a little bit more. I think it's called. What's it called in Limitless? Anyway, it's seen play within a few different decks because of like its ability to discard lots of cards from your deck, which can be. Where is this card? It's in one of these sets. Okay, I found it. Lovely. So it's in Ceruledge EX, which is it's pretty good in that. It's good with United Wings. It's pretty good with Ancient Box. You could play it in Lugia as well. There are some different ways to play it. You could do some interesting things. It's not super insanely strong, but ultimately it's an okay card and pretty solid in its value. It's very comparable to Energy Search Pro within certain decks. Within other decks, they're pretty terrible. They're essentially just completely useless, but within certain decks, they do have a pretty solid, like, you should probably play them. And Scramble Switch. Ultimately, I don't really know what to say about Scramble Switch. Scramble Switch is a switch, but then you also move the energy to the new Pokemon from your old active, so that's kind of cool. It saw a lot. It seemed like playing expanded because it's an old reprint spec, and I don't really know what to say about it. It's kind of cool though. You can do some like Dialga shenanigans with it, which is also something you can do in expanded. But overall, I think it's like a theoretically interesting ace spec. It's one that it's solid. Like I might recommend if you're like buying physical cards, I might recommend picking it up once the set drops, or maybe now, but probably not now, because it could end up being pretty good in the future, but ultimately it's a niche one. Then we have these control cards, or like pseudo control cards which I do think are pretty solid. We have Whaleren, which stops your opponent from attacking sometimes, which is pretty good. Rotom, which discards energies, which discards tools and items. You have Turtonator, which discards energies. Dedenne, which is a really solid recovery Pokemon, and you also have Kecleon, which is, in my opinion, a pretty solid wall. I've not heard like any talk about Kecleon. I haven't really heard talk about Turtonator either. I've heard talk about the others, I think, but there are some like okay control cards. It's not one of those sets where it's like, oh, every card's control. You also do have some interesting control cards within the set. Oh, this like Trapwix is kind of interesting as well, but it's kind of bad. It's like it's kind of like Team Turbo Energize as well, but probably worse than Smoochum. But you do have the Durant EX, which is actually playable within control, though not particularly strong. And you have some damage reduction cards. You have this Titan, which is pretty good for stall, theoretically, as a stalling option, but it's not like super strong. But then we have what I called support cards within the B tier. I said they're all kind of like support cards. Uxie is not really. It's an attacker. It's a spread attacker, but it's not really like your only attacker. You need some other stuff to back it up and to actually do more substantial damage. Then we have a bunch of trainers, which are pretty solid. Surfer and Cyrano and Drayton, I think, are all pretty solid supporters. They're not the highest tier supporter. They're a little bit below. I think they're cards that will end up seeing some play. Surfer, I think, is a pretty solid, pretty underrated supporter. It's very much like the supporter Birdkeeper, which Birdkeeper ended up seeing some play. Surfer has seen some play as well in just like a variety of decks. If you like it, you like it, but there's no really common factors in these decks either. Birdkeeper was just switch and draw 3, and so that was like an okay card, and ended up seeing a decent chunk of play as a like second tier supporter, and it was not a broken supporter, but was okay. Then we have Drayton. Drayton is it gets you an item, or no, any trainer, but probably you're looking for an item, as well as a Pokemon from the top 7 cards of your deck. This is okay, getting solid value, kind of like a discount Irida for non-water decks, or maybe even water decks once they rotate. It's not consistent to the level of Irida, but can get you stuff that you're looking for, and might be good enough. It's certainly going to be good enough in some situations. It won't be good enough in all of them, but ultimately might be what some decks are looking to play. Then we have Cyrano here, which gets 3 EXs. Ultimately, with the current EXs we see, there aren't too many that are super powerful draw EXs. We have Pheasantipty EX and Squawkabilly EX, which are both nice, but ultimately you're looking to get like a, I guess, Pheasantipty EX, Pidgeot EX, and Charizard EX or something like that. I think you're going to struggle to get value from all 3 EXs, and they can be duplicates, but I think you'll struggle to get value from all of them, but you can get value from 2 of them, and potentially if another strong draw EX comes out, it can be quite nice. We have these 2 stadiums, which augment HP, reduce the HP of stage 2s, or increase it of basics. They are pretty solid cards, though I don't know exactly what to say about them until I've seen them in action. I mean, that's kind of true for all these cards, but I think it's more true for these stadiums because they are really interesting and unique stadiums. Stadiums are generally cards that are kind of hard to gauge exactly how good they are. Erasio Underdepths, I didn't exactly know what to expect. It's like in a weird spot right now. It's not a bad stadium. It's a really good stadium, but exactly what are its best use cases, I'm not sure. And then we have the Meowstic, which gusts if you discard a certain item from your hand, which I think is a pretty solid card. Magneton, which is pretty good in specifically Miraidon decks and some other stuff as well. You can use it to power up the Tera Lightning Pokemon, or the Stellar Lightning Pokemon more specifically, but any Lightning Pokemon really. Then we do have Togekiss, which takes an extra prize on a coin flip. I think this card's kind of broken. I don't know if broken like super good, but it's broken like, I think it's problematically designed and quite strong. Then the A tier cards. I do have Rescue Carrier. I don't know if this is an A tier card. Maybe it's just a B tier card. I think I'm a little down on it compared to other people, but it's not a bad card, allowing you to fill your entire bench with basics from your deck, which is pretty insane. Not triggering abilities there, but it is getting you set up and is quite good. Then we have Tera Orb, which gets a Tera Pokemon out of the deck into your hand. It's like a ball search card. And we've seen Featherball see some play, I'd say right now. It's like a C tier card, maybe even a B tier card, but probably a C tier card. It's ultimately kind of weak though, but Tera Orb I think is kind of like a better Featherball. They're not the same, but they can be used in the same way to get Pidgeot EX, but also they can be used just as excuse me, a solid next ball search card. Like, you have Ultra Ball, you have Nest Ball, and those might not be exactly what you're looking for. They each have their downsides, but this can be that other card. Again, kind of like Cyrano, you're looking for an EX, specifically a Tera with really strong like on-play abilities and stuff. Right now, most Teras don't really have abilities, to be honest. Most Stellars don't have. Wait, oh, it's Tera, so it could be. Yeah, there are a good few Teras with abilities, but nothing super insane. Then we have Gastrodon turning off stage 2 abilities, pretty good against Dusknoir, Charizard EX, Archeom, Excalibur, Pidgeot EX, and I'm sure there's some more as well. Ultimately, it's a pretty solid card. Though it does have some vulnerabilities, but it's not that bad. We have Kyurem EX, Black Kyurem EX, which can counter Dragon Pokemon, which is quite nice, as dragons are the best type in the game, and it's like not that close. I mean, there's some other good types, but how to say that? Yeah, like Rich Draco V-Star, Raging Bolt EX, and then Dragapult EX are all very, very good decks right now. In my opinion, top 5 decks. Dragapult EX in this tournament set doesn't have as much play. If we look online, though, Dragapult EX is quite high up, especially if we combine stuff. It's really high up. Ultimately, I think pretty much everyone would say Raging Bolt EX, Regidrago V-Star, and Dragapult EX are all top 10 decks, and probably have two of them in the top 5 as well, at least two of them. And so being able to counter them is pretty nice. It's not a perfect counter though. Then we have Pikachu EX, which can't be one-shotted by damage, which is quite nice. This is a solid ability. It's playable as a tech option, or as the Tera of choice within Miraidon, and then it's also pretty good just as like a wall and for theoretically attacking. Its attack is quite strong if you power it up. It's one of the best stellar attacks we've seen so far, although ultimately they've all been really bad, or at least pretty flawed and having some serious issues. Pikachu EX also has issues. I mean, they all have issues, but it is the one that I think is potentially the most likely to see play. Then we have Milotic EX as well, which is a pretty good walling all Tera Pokemon, which are quite good in the metagame right now. Then we have our Caledon EX, as these three are main attackers. The Black EX is like an attacker as well. Well, maybe they're not main attackers with Caledon, but anyways. Milotic EX is also like a pseudo-attacker. These two are, I'd say, like pseudo-attackers, but not the main type of attackers. They're more so support attackers and like tech attacks and stuff. Then we have the Ceruledge EX, which just does 20 more for each energy in your discard for only 1 on a stage 1. It's really good. It's by far the best Tera best Tera and best Stellar from the set. Pikachu EX is not a bad card, but I definitely say this is better than it, I would say. And then Pikachu EX is okay. Ultimately, might end up being better if it gets certain types of support, but doesn't really have the support it's quite looking for just yet. Because in order to attack it, it has to use its stellar attack. Then we see Duraludon EX. Duraludon EX has a really solid ability, accelerating mental energy. In my opinion, it's much better. I think it's better than Metang. Like, I don't like Metang, to be honest. I don't like too much randomness, but this is a really solid ability, a really solid attack, high HP, a little bit of versatility with like Relicanth, Duraludon stuff, and you have, did I say Duraludon EX? It's Caledon EX, I'm not sure what I said, but it is a pretty solid attacker, and honestly, like the fact that the top 2 attackers from the set, at least the top 2 EXs, I think Caledon's really good as well. Are stage 1 EXs, and the third best one would be Milotic EX as well, probably. Like, these are the main attackers. Milotic EX not necessarily being a main attacker, but our Caledon EX, it's not always as well. But these are solid stage 1 EXs that are filling in for the only good run right now, which is Goldengo EX. I mean, there's some other ones that are controlly, that are not bad. I actually want to take a quick look what the stage 1 EXs are. We have, this might pull up a bunch of weird things. Let's take a quick look. Let's see, cards appear as competitive. You have some okay ones. Palafin's an okay card as well. That one isn't here apparently. I think Palafin EX is okay. Like, ultimately, there are some okay ones. You have Blissey EX, which is okay. You have, honestly, Scovillain EX, not super terrible, but not great. For Giraffe EX is one, as well as Northern EX and Sprathro EX, and Toadstool EX is these, like, control-y stage 1 EXs, but they're not really main attackers. Certainly not to the level of Goldengo, which is the main attacker. You even see stuff like Armouge EX, which is okay, but ultimately they're not super good. I think Ceruledge EX and our Caledon EX are better than, they're at a similar level to Goldengo EX. Then we do see Caridon, which does 180 if one of your other ancient Pokemon used an attack last turn, which I believe could be another Caridon. I don't think it can be the same one switched in now. I don't remember, but anyways, obviously ancient decks are pretty good if we look at the decks in the metagame right now. I mean, ancient decks aren't insane, but Raging Bolt Ogerpon is pretty good. And then you got ancient Box and Roaring Moon decks as well. And looking at the ancient Pokemon, that's not ancient, that's ancient trait. Looking at the ancient Pokemon in standard, you have honestly a good chunk. So if you're just trying to look to slot some ancient Pokemon into a deck, you have Fluttermane, which you could put in. That's really the main. Oh, Screamtail as well. Like, you could be playing Gardevoir EX and attack with Screamtail and Fluttermane or whatever, and then attack with the Caridon. It's very sketchy because Caridon is not psychic because it's not. So you would need to manually attach, but you could do that. And it just really kind of surprise your opponent. Not exactly surprised because you'll probably have to play it down with the turn before and attach. But ultimately, it is a pretty. It's a really good card. It's one of the best single prize attackers we've seen in quite a while. Then we have the top 2 cards, which are pretty clearly Counter Gain as well as Latias EX. Latias EX just gives all your basic Pokemon free retreat. This is really good. Peckrin EX is a pretty solid card, but Latias EX is just Really good across the board. Bad against Snorlax, but it's good against pretty much everything else. It isn't like that low HP. Its HP is like, I want to say it's 210, which is like really solid. I mean, it's like pretty average, but it's very solid, specifically for a support Pokemon. And then you have Counter Gain, which says you attack for one colorless less if it's the tool is attacked, and you're down on prizes. Ultimately, it's very good for control, but good for other things as well. Currently, the metagame, you need attackers that attack for colorless and also don't have just like super easy to pay attacks. This doesn't really fit super well into most of the top decks. Looking at it, it doesn't really help Original Ball, Charizard, Regidraco. It doesn't really help Lugia, Dragapult, Palkia, Gardevoir. But then Iron Thorns, Snorlax, theoretically Miraidon, and Pidgeot control, even like Roaring Moon, and certainly Terapagos EX as well. That's going to get insane value off this card. I imagine, it's a pretty strong card. It's a card that we saw in the past. It is a reprint, not of a card in standard, but this card did end up seeing a bunch of play. Well, it was in standard. These results might not look like, they might look pretty long. I mean, they're not short, certainly, but there are modern cards have more results, so it's all a lot of play. And then in Japan, it's seen play in a variety of decks. We see it in actually Hydreigon EX. Hydreigon EX, in my opinion, isn't like super strong. How much play has Hydreigon EX actually seen? I'm interested in seeing that. It's seen. I mean, it's only on like one page, so it's not like anything crazy. But then you can see it in all sorts of things. I mean, you can even play it in like Charizard EX apparently for. No, I don't know. I don't really know why it's in this deck, to be honest. You could get value with Fezidifty EX or Pidgeot EX. You can just do some interesting things there. Or Radiant Charizard as well. I guess probably Radiant Charizard. And you can find value in it in lots of different decks. It's a very, very strong tool. Ultimately, this set is a pretty solid one. It's not the best set we've ever seen, but it is a very solid set. And it is going to bring a bunch of new cards that are pretty cool to the format. I'm really excited for this. Obviously, Pokemon TCG is in a really weird spot right now. I'm excited for what's going to happen in the future, though, and I hope you are too. But I hope you enjoyed. Consider liking, subscribing, hitting the bell, joining the channel, all that good stuff. And as always, I'm excited to see you in the next video.